Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with test school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is cultivating and recognizing academic curiosity. But first, let's meet our special guest, Matthew Jaskol.
Matthew Jaskol is committed to empowering young scholars from all backgrounds to think critically and create meaningful change. He co-founded Pioneer Academics, a public benefit corporation that delivers rigorous and cutting-edge academic initiatives, and is also committed to eliminating financial and geographic barriers for high-achieving low-income students worldwide. Its two flagship institutes are the Pioneer Research Institute, the world's only fully accredited online research institute for high school students, and the Global Problem Solving Institute, a virtual innovation lab where students tackle complex global challenges through interdisciplinary thinking and collaborative design. Matthew believes that when intellectual curiosity is nurtured with structure and academic rigor, it sparks extraordinary growth. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Matthew, it's great to have you on the show. Amy and I have been looking forward to having a conversation about academic curiosity with you since we met at the IUCA conference in Detroit this year.
Yeah.
But before we do that, we'd love to hear a bit about your background and the enterprises that you've helped bring to life.
That's great. Well, yeah, I actually began this journey in the US. I grew up in New Jersey and went to school at Skidmore College and had a variety of different things I did over the course of my career. And starting, I guess, in 97 or so, I actually moved over to Asia and worked over there for quite a while. I spent some time with the Economist Group and some different things like that. And really had this opportunity to where I came across the challenges that I was seeing for international students looking to go to college in the United States. The chance to kind of say, hey, how do I stand out as a student? How do I show what I'm capable of? And concurrently, I was also doing some work in education with some colleges in the United States. And there was this discussion of among some of the administration of, how could students do some really interesting college level work when the AP has become a little bit of ubiquitous, test prep, which kind of hits your area a little bit, right? And so there was this whole discussion of how could we have students do really interesting self-directed undergraduate level work. And that is what led to the development of Pioneer Academics, which runs these two institutes now that are both accredited and just really interesting opportunities for students to explore and develop their interests.
Yeah, it's so interesting how much has changed over the years for college admissions as far as demonstrating sort of this knowledge or their global knowledge or kind of getting involved in research and internships. And so that's basically what you've been able to accomplish for your students, which really, like with the topic of intellectual curiosity, right, is the fact that we want our students to be able to come to college, right, with sort of some of this developed when they arrive on campus. Can you talk a little bit about what would the development process for a curious but undecided student look like, since we know so many students arrive on a college campus not really sure what they want to do?
Right. And actually, I think that's one of the beautiful things about the American college system, is that you can go in and you're expected many times to explore. You're not expected, as in many international situations, to have picked your major and applied for that major.
They track much earlier in many countries, right? You're like, you're going into college and like they're coming out a lawyer.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
Like you're on that path.
I think a lot of students think they may think I'm coming out a doctor or a lawyer, but the other thing is like, who's going to apply for anthropology if you've never really studied anthropology, right? Or, so that opportunity to explore, I think, is one of the most beautiful aspects of the American college system. And I think it's actually even American students are in a little bit of a quandary. So we might say, oh, the international student applying for an international school doesn't know what major they want to apply for. Well, I think American students who are competitive and ambitious often find themselves saying, wow, I need to have my hook, right? I need to not only be a good student, but what is my hook? And there's this sense of their need to find their passion, which is something that, it's a semantical argument, but I think it's important to look at actually students developing their passion. So your question was about, what happens if the student doesn't really know what their interest or passion is? And my answer is that that's very normal. A 14 to 16-year-old feels this need to figure something out and have done three things in it so they have a track record in 2 years, and I need to know what my thing is. And I think that a 14 to 15, 16, 17-year-old who is interested in a couple things is not unfocused is human, right? So I think that what we want to encourage students to do is to not get overstressed about what is my one thing or what is my two things, but actually have them just identify some things that they're interested in and take them to the next step and not feel concerned about, well, what if I've put all my chips on the wrong number? That I think is the most important aspect of it. And it allows students to kind of recognize that any interest they develop is going to be challenging.
We seem to have a situation in K-12 schooling these days where we have the students that care about learning and the students that don't. We always have, but it seems much more pronounced in that more and more students seem to be phoning it in on one hand. And then on the other hand, you have a whole cadre of students that are kind of over focused, kind of what you're saying, Matthew, that like they think that there's one answer and they have to pursue it all the way to the end. Why do you think that fostering intellectual curiosity gets overlooked? Why is that spark not being lit in enough students these days?
Well, that's a great question. And I think uh, it comes from the point of finding a good question. This is something that we really think about a lot. And when we look at the way the system, the current academic system, current high school, traditionally handles what you're learning and what you have to do, the what can lead people to be so unengaged is this sense of what I need to do is learn everything that I need to know and demonstrate it to make the test to get that kind of result. Um, and there was a great study done. I think it was a survey was published, I believe, in The Guardian, but it was talking about how little kids ask their parents so many questions, right? And I think there is some crazy number, like a 4.5-year-old girl in the United Kingdom asks her mother something like 390 questions a day,
Oh, wow.
which is it's insane, right? And of course there's a joke about it because the father always says, well, go ask your mom. But but then when you talk to high school students now and you say, how many real questions did you ask in high school last week? Like, not like, can you help me understand that better, or can you repeat that, or but real, I'm curious about something questions. There's very little of it. And so I think that's partly out of necessity because we do need to build a set of skills and knowledge. But the system really wasn't designed for cultivating curiosity that's intrinsically driven as much. And that's what I think a lot of our colleges kind of start to say, oh, now you can explore all these different majors, but you have to have made it through that slog of high school to get there.
And it's tough, right? Like trying to figure that out on your own or realizing that there could be some significance to that in the college admissions process.
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit about what have you learned about trying to engage students in these big problems that sort of surround us in the world today?
Right. Well, I would say there's two things that we kind of see from the way our students discover their interests or develop their interests. One of them, when we look at this Global Problem Solving Institute, is this process where we say, there are big problems that just anybody could be interested in. Access to clean water or climate change. All the big numbers that you probably see out there. And as you start to recognize those as interdisciplinary problems and start to, disaggregate some of the disciplines that are involved there, if you're looking at that in an interdisciplinary way, you get students to actually dig into or start to recognize interests that they wouldn't have recognized otherwise. So, for example, I'll take climate change because it's really easy, right? Climate change is not just an environmental science problem, it's also an economics problem. It's also a behavioral psychology problem. And if you start to help students recognize these parts of these problems that pretty much anyone could get interested in, they say, oh, I didn't realize that economics was something I would want to pursue, but because I see it from rooted in this big problem that I was working on, oh, now I actually want to take that a step further, right? Um, and that is a very the point is to actually help students find uh, an organic path to develop their interest rather than trying to say, what do you want to do? Or what do you want to do research on, or something like that. I think that we see that also in the research process that we go through, where a student will say, I'm interested in psychology. Okay, well, there's behavioral, right? There's clinical, there's developmental, and sometimes the student feels so like burdened by trying to say, "Oh, I have to know what my research question is." We say, "No, actually, 50% of your time is spent trying to figure out what's a good research question. It's got to be original. It's got to be doable within a time period that you're going to work on. It's got to be something you're really interested in. And that's the beauty of of developing that interest rather than saying, I have to know what it is so that I can, get to my end goal.
You know, it strikes me that when we talk about asking questions to big problems, that very often when students are thinking of their futures, they
Right.
think about things to be. I want to be this kind of profession, or I want to study this kind of subject, but they don't connect with why. And ultimately, what problems do they want to solve in life? We all, like, all of our careers are based on the problems we've usually deliberately chosen to tackle. And professional growth comes from asking more questions and finding more solutions. So it seems to me that engaging with students on that level is about really preparing them for what what a life that you have agency over looks like.
I think that's beautifully said. And when we think of even that example where we said, okay, you're going to look at climate change and that takes you to economics, and then you said, oh, I'm actually interested in behavioral economics and whatever, that's also a very short part of that journey. What you're really trying to have the student understand, in my opinion, is the beauty and the challenge of figuring a path forward, not that it is their life's path.
Right.
But once you look at that and you say, okay, this was really interesting. I took this from point A to point B, and then I saw a connection to something else and I connected it to that. You're going to go off to college and then have the opportunity to redo that when you're choosing a major, and maybe you're going to change your major. That's the whole beauty of having all these electives that have nothing to do with your major. I would say I think major courses for most, arts and sciences school are about 40% of the courses you take. There's
Mhm.
probably about 20% core courses. That leaves you another 40% of go out and try some stuff. And if you look at it from a perspective, this is where I think it connects to your point, Mike, is that sense of developing an understanding of how you create direction. leads a student then to go off to college and not just take that class because someone said it was cool or someone said that they liked the teacher, but rather because they connect it to other things that they're looking at in their search for their college development path. And that will happen later in their career as well.
Yeah, exactly. But getting started in high school to learn what that's like, because you're right, in college, how many students, even even diligent ones, select courses because they hear it's an easy A, they hear that you don't have to go to class, like they choose them for the wrong reasons, as opposed to the people who are like, I want to take this class because I'm really interested in it, or because I know that I'm going to need this for something else,
Right.
or the students that they like wind up adding extra majors and minors because they're just so excited to learn these topics.
And while I'm not a college admissions officer, everyone I have talked to has said to me that that is kind of what they're looking for, is a sense of, I'm going to bring this person into my campus and they're going to contribute intellectually and community-wise to the experience. The more they have a sense of not, this is exactly what I want to do, but rather this is how I am going to develop and how I'm going to take agency over my development, gives them a chance of being more successful and a better addition to that community and everything else that makes the most out of college. I tend to think that's what they're looking for.
Well, I also throw
Absolutely.
in sometimes when you're exploring things in high school, you don't have to like it, right? So we also overlook the fact that engaging in these things may teach you something you are not interested in or you do not want to do, which is still part of the learning process, right? Too, you could realize this isn't really something I did it, but it's something maybe it's an area that I don't want to necessarily explore. Like ruling things out is also a good thing to happen when you're in high school.
Right, but I would also add there's, I think, a cautionary note about that a little bit, which is that I think that when a student tries something and they say, maybe this is something I'm interested in, I'm going to pursue it, if they're going to take it to a level where it really matters, it's going to get challenging.
Mhm.
And that I think is also something that there's this great study by Carol Dweck at Stanford. She's that person
Mhm.
who talks so much about, growth
Grit.
mindset versus
Yep.
fixed mindset. And she has this that they did this a version of this study where they had I think over 400 students to watch a documentary on black holes, and then um, they had them read a scientific paper about it. Now, the students who they describe as having a fixed mindset said, this got really hard, maybe this isn't my thing. And the students who had more of a growth mindset were able to say, oh, this is hard, but they're taking on the challenge versus saying, oh, I'm going to cross this one off of my list
Mhm.
of interests I have found, which is why she actually and their team is actually a very strong proponent of this idea that developing an interest um, it's important to think about it as developing an interest because that way you don't think of I have a limited set of things and I just have to check off all the ones till I find the right one.
So clarify that. You're saying that that process of exploration, people, and we're not even going to say students, like this could be anybody, right?
Sure.
Should should be like, I'm just trying to cultivate an interest. I'm just trying to see if I'm interested in this.
I think that people have a number of things they're interested in. It's not a set three things and I find them or I don't.
Hmm.
And I think then that a student who pursues those interests and develops that interest is on a healthy path. I think a lot of students feel I have 2 years to figure this out. And if I pick the wrong one, I've messed up my chance. And so they should just choose one or two or three things and move the ball forward and not be worried about what if it's the wrong thing. That's the difference, I think, that's what I mean by cultivating intellectual curiosity and not be afraid if it's like, oh, that got hard because they're seeing themselves develop in this way.
Yeah, that makes me think of Seth Godin's concept of the dip.
Oh,
how lots of things, you have a quick learning curve and then things get hard. Everything gets hard,
right.
right? And what do we say all the time, right? Like everything's difficult before it becomes easy,
True.
but if you don't hang with it, you'll never get to that point.
Right. I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's um further challenged by this sense of I have to show these accomplishments. And therefore, if it's research, I have to get published or I have to get a recommendation letter, something of this nature. And so that's where I think when you look at the pursuit of the extrinsic motivation of I need to get that trophy, because colleges will like that or something of that nature, you lose that intrinsic sense of the beauty of exploring and pursuing and seeing connections because you're pursuing a goal that's sort of externally imposed versus that chance to say, okay, maybe step one has a goal, maybe step two has a goal, but it's not necessarily a straight line.
There's also that idea, right? That, say we're looking at high school. There are some constraints. Students do need to satisfy all their core requirements and pick electives. They do need to find extracurriculars and hopefully find something that they can commit to over time, show leadership, show excellence. And ultimately, everyone will, if they don't really mess up, graduate high school and they're going to have to go on to some kind of further education or career or military service or whatever, right? So have you found ways for students to kind of manage that idea that they've got to explore, they can't give up too quickly if they're interested, but at the same time, they should be diligent and not just wait for an answer? You know what I'm saying? Is like how long is too long if we're talking about your formative years, not your life's work. We're still just figuring things out about ourselves.
Yeah, I think that high school uh, has a lot of requirements to it. It's a lot to keep up with just in itself. So the amount of excess space you have to do other things is limited. Um, and we are constantly hearing from our faculty, from our students, from all, about, mental health and how students often overburden themselves. And so I think the way to create space and the way to create that development of intellectual curiosity beyond the classroom, because the classroom is going to always function as you have to learn these things. Well, let me take a caveat to that. There are some great programs like IB, and there's some schools, that and the AP capstone is looking to cultivate self-directed interest, and many schools have an opportunity to do an independent study, and I think those things are wonderful. So I love when schools will support that. But I think it's more incumbent on students, their families, to start at an earlier age and try moving the ball forward on a couple things and not be concerned of what if I have the wrong thing. And I think that's a big piece. And as far as teachers are concerned, I mean, they have a big burden of stuff they have to cover and all their, core curriculum requirements and whatever that is. But I really think we lose something in this classroom where we don't have this opportunity to say to students, tomorrow your homework is to think of one question that you're really curious about over this last unit that we covered.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. And then have some time to really explore those questions.
Right. Even if the teacher doesn't have an answer, but
Yeah.
validating that sense of a question and what makes a good question, even talking about what makes a good question is such an interesting thing.
Yeah, that's such a fascinating idea. Matthew, it's obvious we could talk about this all day. Unfortunately, we can't explore it anymore. We're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to, further conversations in the future, but I appreciate all the work you're doing to bring these ideas out to the public.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can email me at matthew.jaskol@pioneeracademics.com.
Can you spell Jaskol?
Sure, Jaskol is spelled Jaskol.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Tests and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.